Hello and welcome. Again, this is your instructor, Dennis Westman. And today I'd like to talk a little bit about Chapter 9, which is Managing Compensation. So, as we've done in the past, if you would, please get your textbook out. And I'll spend a few minutes talking about the high points related to compensation. And again, if you have any questions after viewing this video, you're welcome to post to the discussion board. You can email me through Blackboard or even email me directly at westmand@grayson.edu. Okay, so let's get started. Again, have your textbook out and let's take a moment to look at Chapter 9. And Chapter 9, again, deals mostly with compensation, managing compensation. And the chapter begins on page 412. But to set the stage, let's talk a little bit about what exactly is compensation. Oftentimes you think of compensation as being, your gross or your bring home pay. But actually it's much more than that. There are other factors and other items that can be included in compensation. And so I think it's important that we have a basic understanding that compensation is simply not just the actual making of your gross income or your net income, but it involves some other factors as well. So one of the first items that's talked about in Chapter 9 on page 412 deals with strategic compensation planning. And essentially it's how do you plan for compensation as it relates to the business. In Chapter 9 on page 413 talks about linking the compensation to organizational objectives. In probably your previous classes and other studies, you've heard of things like the mission statement, the goals, the objectives of the business. And so in some cases, compensation can be tied to those organizational objectives. And then there's also a way that you can tie compensation based on pay for performance standard, which is talked about on page 414. And essentially what this is employees are rewarded or compensated based on their effort and their performance. Do a good job, you get paid well. If you don't do a good job, you don't get paid so much. And essentially, your compensation is tied directly to your effort and your performance. And then on page 415, it talks a little bit about motivating employees through compensation. It'd be nice to say that money doesn't motivate, but let's be honest. Most people are motivated to some extent based on what they earn at the business, and they also feel appreciated when they feel like the business, the company, is compensating them fairly and equitably. And so compensation does have some component or some component of motivating in employees. And then at the bottom of page 415 it talks a little bit about pay equity. And essentially that means making the pay equitable across multiple positions, across multiple organizational units, and even across the business. And what's happened in some cases is that some places the employees are not compensated equitably against their peers or against each other, and so that can cause some issues, not only resentment and animosity within the company, but it could cause problems later down the road with not being able to motivate the employees because they say, hey, you know what, you're paying such and such more, let them do more of the work. And so it's real important to be mindful as future business people that we take pay equity into consideration. And then at the bottom of page 416, 417, there's some concepts like expectancy theory and pay, meaning essentially what the company expects and what the effort that I produce, or at which the level at which I produce, is directly related to my pay. You expect more, you ask more of me, then I tend to perform better and maybe meet those goals and objectives related to the business. Now, at the bottom of page 417 is something pretty interesting, talking about pay secrecy. Now, I didn't ask this for material for this chapter as a homework assignment, but I think I'm probably going to do something like that in the future. Check the discussion boards and assignments in the upcoming weeks, because there may be something about this. But what's interesting about this is, think about where you work. Is what you make secret or kind of hidden from other people? I know, for instance, I work for a state agency, and it's very easy to go to the website for the state of Oklahoma and find out exactly what I make. I mean, there is absolutely no problem finding that. And the deal is because of various state laws, you have those situations where it's sort of the public's right to know because they're the taxpayers, and so it's not really secret like it once was. In Texas, for instance, you can find out what people make by simply going to any public library, especially around the local community college or university, and looking up the budgetary information. That's freely available, so you can find out what pretty much anyone makes. So in the public sector, tax-based institutions, it's really not that difficult to find out what we make. Now in the private sector, if you're not a publicly traded company, then you're going to have a little bit more issue trying to find out what exactly people make. And so think about where you work. Do other people know what you make? Maybe, maybe not. But pay secrecy is a really big issue, and it's discussed on page 417 and 418. Now, at the middle to the bottom of page 418, it talks about the basis of compensation. Are you paid on an hourly basis? Are you paid by the piece or the item that's produced? Are you a non-exempt employee, which means that you're covered by overtime provisions? Or are you an exempt employee, which means that you are not covered by overtime provisions? For instance, in my full-time job, I am an exempt employee, meaning I essentially work until the job is done. I don't get any kind of overtime. But you may be in positions where if you work beyond a certain set number of hours, like a 35 or 40-hour work week, then you're entitled to some sort of overtime compensation. Now on page 418, 419, we begin talking about the compensation and the wage mix and exactly how much someone has made, what's the worth of the job, the position, how much is the employee worth, and then the employer's ability to pay. You know, it's often said in my field working in higher education that you can go to Texas and make more money at a comparable college or university than you can in Oklahoma. But think about this. You may even make more money by going to one of the coasts and work for a particular industry. For instance, mine in higher education. But the cost of living is different. And so sometimes the positions and the employers are carefully trying to walk a line between paying their employees, retaining their employees, to ensure that they don't seek employment in other places. Page 422 talks about external factors related to wage rates. You have to pay comparable to what other areas or other industries are paying your area, or they're not going to come work for you. They're actually going to go and work for other places. So it's very important to keep up with that and to pay your employees at a comparable rate. And then something that's in the news recently on 423 is collective bargaining. If you've been following the news, you've heard in the past that legislatures are trying to pass various restrictions on collective bargaining. And so I think you should read 423 and understand a little bit about the idea or the concept of collective bargaining. Now, the next section of the chapter deals with job evaluation. Many of you probably have been evaluated at some point in your position, depending on what your job is. I've been evaluated. You evaluate me as students at the end of the semester. I'm evaluated by my supervisor, and then I have the opportunity to evaluate my peers and my colleagues as well. And so these are just essentially ways that we can measure our success, or the employer measures the success. And in Chapter 9 on page 424, 425, 426, 427, and 428 talks much more about the evaluation process. Now, on page 428 at the bottom, you begin talking about the compensation structure. And this is essentially how wages or compensation are calculated to make sure that there's equity, that it's fair, that it's based on skill level, that it's based on quality of work produced, and so on. And so that section talks about how the compensation is structured. And there's some surveys that the government uses to find out exactly how much people make or what's considered fair for those types of positions. And again, you can look at those pages 429, 430, 31, 32, 433, and 434, and find out additional information about that. Now, at the bottom of page 435 begins the discussion about government regulation of compensation, and this is a really hot topic. And if you look on page 436, there is some information about something like minimum wage, and whether there are minimum wage rates or laws that are from the federal government or from the state government. The federal government sets a federal minimum wage, and in some states, because of cost of living, will actually raise the federal minimum wage to sort of a state minimum wage. I know, for instance, my brother works in California, and the minimum wage there is quite a bit higher than what the minimum wage is here, because the cost of living is more expensive. But there are all sorts of laws related to the different types of compensation and governmental regulations, Fair Pay and Fair Labor Standards Act, and that sort of thing. Those are all detailed on page 436, 437, 38, 39, and there's some information on page 439 about the federal minimum wage and how it progressed from what it was in 2007 up to what it became in July of 2009. And then finally, again, pay careful attention to some of those laws, because you will be tested. You will be tested on that. And then the last unit, or the last section of the chapter, deals with things such as low salary budgets and wage compression, and the fact that maybe wages aren't increasing as much as the cost of living. We typically say, working in the public sector, for instance, like in higher ed, you don't necessarily go for the actual gross or net pay. There are some additional benefits that a lot of people like, for instance, the holidays, the spring break, and those kinds of things. But that last unit really talks about other kinds of compensation issues. And again, that finishes up Chapter 9. So after you watch this video, be sure that you take some notes, make some notes, and then if you have any questions, again, please feel free to post it to the discussion board, or send me an email through Blackboard, or even send an email to westmand@grayson.edu. Thank you, and have a great day. I'll see you soon.